Dear beloved in Christ, I greet you all in the wonderful name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. It is indeed yet again a great joy to welcome you all to this HeartEdge Enrichment conversation, the Lenten Series. Thank you to each one of you for making the time to join us today. The Lenten Series, HeartEdge Enrichment Conversations, are brought to you by the Cathedral of St. Mary the Virgin in Johannesburg, in partnership with St. Martin's in the Fields in London, as part of the HeartEdge global network of churches. As you know, we will each week be hosting a guest speaker, some from within South Africa and some globally. Each speaker begins by giving an input, and then we have an opportunity for a Q&A. These conversations focus on the local contextual renewal, drawing from the 4 C's of HeartEdge, aimed at mission and ministry transformation. Last week, we hosted Revd Kgabe, who focused on compassion. Today, we focus on culture, which is about exploring the employment and incorporation of creative arts, music, and ideas to reimagine our Christian narrative for the present moment. This is indeed particularly critical for our own African context. It gives me great pleasure, therefore, today to introduce our guest speaker, a sister and a friend. Dr. Vicentia Kgabe is an ordained priest in the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. She currently serves as the rector of the College of Transfiguration Theological College, based in Makanda, Grahamstown. The college is the only residential seminary and training center in the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. She was appointed to this post in June 2014 and lectures in pastoral care and counseling and youth ministry. And she serves as a facilitator of the College of Transfiguration Leadership Development Program. Before coming to court, she served as a parish priest in 8 parishes in the Diocese of Johannesburg. Apart from serving as a parish priest, she also served as an archdeacon and a director of ordination process in the same diocese. Vicentia has served as the chairperson of the board of Hope Africa, the social development program for the Anglican Church of Southern Africa. She is currently the co-chair of the Makanda Circle of Unity, and she is also a deputy chairperson of the Rhodes University Council. She is passionate about issues of leadership, social justice, and active citizenry. It gives me, therefore, great pleasure, brothers and sisters, to hand over to a sister and a friend to address you today. Welcome, Sister Dr. Vicentia. I now hand over to you.
Thank you so much, Brother Obed. It is good to connect again.
And then you really want to trick something in me when you call that name.
Thank you for this opportunity and this invitation. The full study of culture in all its vastness and dimensions belong to the discipline known as anthropology, which studies human beings and takes time to examine their characteristics and their relationship to their environments. Culture, as it is usually understood, entails a totality of traits and characters that are peculiar to a people to the extent that it marks them out from other people or societies. These peculiar traits go on to include the people's language, dressing, music, work, arts, religion, dancing, and so on. It also goes on to include people's social norms, taboos, and values. In this context, values here are to be understood as beliefs that are held about what is right and what is wrong and what is important in life. Edward B. Taylor is reputed as the scholar who first coined and defined culture in his work, Primitive Culture. Was first published in 1871 and reprinted again in 1958. Taylor saw culture as that complex whole that includes knowledge, belief, art, morals, laws, customs, and other capabilities and habits acquired by a person as a member of society. This definition captures the exhaustive nature of culture. One would have expected that this definition will be univocal one, but this is not so. There are as many definitions of culture as there are scholars who are interested in the phenomenon. Culture embraces a wide range of human phenomena, material achievements and norms, beliefs, feelings, manners, morals, and other things. It is the patent way of life shared by a particular group of people that claim to share a single origin or descent. Culture has been classified into material and non-material aspects. While material culture refers to the visible, tangible objects which a person can manufacture for human survival, non-material culture comprises of the norms and mores of the people. While material culture is concrete and takes the form of artifacts and crafts, non-material culture is abstract, but has a very pervasive influence on the lives of the people of that particular culture. What we know is that it is through culture that people and groups define themselves, conform to societal shared values, and contribute to society. So I want to introduce two lenses that we can view culture from. They are ethic and emic. Ethic view of a culture is a perspective of an outsider looking in. Some anthropologists may take this approach to avoid altering the culture that they are studying by direct interaction. This ethic perspective is data gathering by outsiders that yield questions posed by outsiders. One problem that anthropologists may run into is that people tend to act differently when they're being observed. It is especially hard for an outsider to gain access to certain private rituals, which may be important for understanding a culture. Emic view of culture is ultimately a perspective focused on the essential cultural distinctions that are meaningful to the members of a given society, often considered to be an insider's perspective. While this perspective stems from the concept of immersion in a specific culture, the emic participant is not always a member of that culture or society. Because the observer places themselves within the culture of that intended study, they can go further in depth on the details of practices and beliefs of a society that they may otherwise have been ignored. However, the emic perspective has its downfalls. Studies done from an emic perspective can create a bias on the part of the participant. especially if said individual is a member of the culture they are studying, thereby failing to keep in mind how their practices are perceived by others and possibly causing valuable information to be left out. The emic perspective serves the purpose of providing descriptive, in-depth reports about how insiders or culture understands their rituals. So let me talk of my context and experience. Speaking from my experience and context, the church and her members in most cases have adopted either the ethic or emic position at a given time when it comes to religious culture and cultural norms, or culture versus religion. And this is evident in the so-called mainline churches and African-initiated churches, also known as AICs. The formation of the AICs is because of the imposition of foreign culture and custom by the European missionaries. It was a struggle for an independent African church rather than beg or fight the missionaries. They created a way where members could worship God in their way that satisfies their spiritual needs and aspirations. Even though the AICs have grown and are key to their membership ways of worshiping, that does not negate their cultural norms and rituals. There are those members either of the mainline churches or the AICs who have what we call dual membership, or sunrise or sunset membership. And this is because some rituals and sacraments can only be accessed if you are a member of either or. As Sam Wells reminds us, that church can be a place that unites and harmonizes these two senses of culture, which are anthropological and aesthetics. And this amplifies the notion of a church as an estuary, a meeting place of human and divine, gospel and culture, timeless truth and embodied experiences, the word and the world. So what Sam Wells is saying is that we cannot say we are talking about the world out there when we are in the church, because we are both the world and the word. And now in the mainline churches, there is a strong emergence of the theme of enculturation. Enculturation is the term that the Roman Catholic Church leaders and theologians have used in recent decades to denote a process of engagement between the Christian gospel and a particular culture. It signifies the connection between valuing the role of particular churches and valuing the contribution of diverse cultures. And we know the history of how the mainline churches were embedded in the African custom and African culture. If you were to be a member, you had to renounce your culture and your customs. So enculturation says, maybe we can find a way of doing this. Quoting Wells, culture is not a territory to be won or lost, but a resource we are called to steward with care. So this is a call to the church that we cannot fight this battle of culture. It is a resource that we badly need in the church, and we are called to steward it with care. So let's look at the local church as a cultural hub. I was struck by the following statements from Sam Wells' book. First, that the church does not have a culture, it is a culture. Let me repeat this. The church does not have a culture. The church is a culture. And secondly, that the church is a work of art which makes art a sacrament. And thirdly, a celebration and imitation of the way the church is itself a work of art. Thus, art is a sacrament, a tangible item or practice that honors, echoes, replicates a truth embodied in the life, death, and resurrection of Christ. And I had to take a break when I had put this on to think of what is happening in our country. To say, if the creative arts that are finding themselves in the position that they find themselves through COVID, if the church sees the creative arts as sacrament, we cannot be spectators in the plight that they're experiencing during this time. We need to come along and find ways of preserving the acts that they do, the music that they do, create platforms for them to continue to make a living. And if art is a sacrament, then culture makes life worth living. This is what T.S. Eliot has said. If art is a sacrament, then culture makes life worth living. So one thing we are reminded of is that the church building has a significance in the neighborhood that exceeds the gathering for the faithful. It can also be a place where creativity can thrive. It can be a hub, a cultural hub. I grew up in this kind of a church, which I remember with deep affection today on this Mothering Sunday, the parish of St. Hilda Sinawani, where my vocation to the ordained was first discerned and affirmed. In this parish community, music talents were discovered and nurtured, where radio DJs were discovered and supported, where journalists worshiped and understood what it was meant in the gospel by the saying, the truth will set you free. It is in this parish where I was introduced to the theater. A parishioner by the name of Mrs. Wendy Mahlalela worked at the Market Theater, and she organized monthly excursions to the city center of Johannesburg. And we go to watch a stage play at the market. So every month when there was a new play to the market, we'll get to go to the Market Theater to watch a play because she would have organized this for the church. This was the highlight of my young life. And it is in this parish where the soccer culture was alive. Soccer team allegiances were strong and bound to alter the Sunday worship mood, depending on either a win or a lose of your favorite team. No wonder that one of the best African continent football coaches, Peter Musimani, calls this parish his spiritual home. So the sports and the music and the theater thrived in this place. This is a parish where the gift of language was celebrated. All the 11 official languages spoken in South Africa were used in worship and in church meetings, including Tsotsitaal, a vernacular derived from a variety of mixed languages mainly spoken in the townships of Gauteng province. You could have a Pentecost experience or a Tower of Babel moment, depending on the occasion. Culture and art found expression in our young people's weekly meetings, diocesan youth meetings, concerts, spiritual revivals, and conferences. Many of talented brothers and sisters were nurtured from this place, including the best orators that were likes of the Dean of Johannesburg, were founded from this kind of movement. So now with COVID, my question that I want to pose is, how do we use the church building or the church in this COVID time? I want to take this question and this point on Sam Wells' point regarding the church building having a significance in the neighborhood that exceeds just the gathering of the faithful, and that it can be also a place where creativity can thrive. With the COVID-19 pandemic, my hope and wish are that the local church, if they haven't, that they will have an opportunity to evaluate how best the buildings can be used beyond worship and be a place where creativity can thrive. As we've been made aware that we need to learn with the virus, we are not going to wait until the virus is gone. We have to learn to live with it. This evaluation has the potential to address the issues of social ills, including unemployment, keeping the vulnerable safe, and nurturing new talents in our community. But this process in our churches will need a much more serious look at the culture of the church. Sam Wells likens the culture of the church to either a company's culture. That you can have the best strategy, but if your culture doesn't speak to that, you're just wasting your time. And if the culture is not in line with what you want to do, you have to change it. As we continue to speak prophetically to the leaders of government, we need to speak prophetically within the church about how we change the culture of the church. And there are three things that are listed that can help us to be a place that thrives. That we need to be a hospitable church, a welcoming church. We can have that written in our pew leaflets or in the entrance of our churches, but if it's not practiced, then we don't have a hospitable church. We have to be a church that is open to the stranger and the different. We have to be a church that is unafraid to embark on faithful experiments. And for this and many more to happen, Wells urges the church and say the church has to let go of the need to direct outcomes and linear trajectories and let the Holy Spirit govern in the interactions and catalyses its own surprises. So we have to dream big for the church to be a place where culture thrives, where the talents and the skills and the gifts find place to express themselves. So this is my contribution, and I'm thankful to engage with you, Dean, as we unpack this.
Thank you, Sister Vicentia. By the way, her name is Mavesta. She quoted the Obed one. I'll quote the Mavesta one. Thank you, sis. Thank you, sis, for the input. I am sure to those who are joining us today, it's actually bringing a lot of memories when you talk about church culture and practice. And therefore, brothers and sisters, I want to encourage you as we continue the conversation with Dr. Vicentia to please post your questions or your comments on the YouTube chat so that we'll be able to bring those comments and questions to her. But Dr. Vicentia, let's start here. The first thing you really spoke about as an overall, that there seems to be a norm or a culture in the way we behave as Christians, where we see the world as different or the church as actually different. How do we help ourselves as a church to see the world as part of us and to see us as being called to influence the world in our mission and in our ministry? I think Dr. Sam speaks a little bit about this separation. I think I want to start with that question before I engage on others. How do we move to that holistic understanding of who we are as a church?
I think we do ourselves a disservice as preachers and leaders that in our sermons we continue to talk about them and us, the world and the church, and create this division as if we are not part of that. And we make the church walls a very extra holy place that only those of us who are pure can attain and access. And that's why we have who can come in and who cannot. And we forget that the minute we step out of the church boundaries, we are now the world. We speak the language, we act, it's so natural to assimilate to that. But my thing is, the minute we remember what the church space is all about, we'll be able to have the church beyond walls, the church beyond a physical space, but our church is everywhere we go and what we do. That is not a location and a time slot. So for me, what is important, that I've stopped long time ago when it dawned on me to say, what happens when you leave church? Where do you go? And the people that you talk so badly about, are they not your friends and your family that you're going to interact with after this? They're not the world. They're part of who you are and shaped you. And you come into church to offer prayers, to pray thanksgiving. It is because of what has taken place outside of the church boundaries.
Yeah, of course, those who talk about church boundaries would talk about the four walls of the church. And in essence, if you look at it, the church is in the world, is not in heaven.
Yes.
So we are already in the boundaries of the world as we continue. Yeah. But also the second question that, the second conversation that I want to just put across. It seems to me, as you were sharing and reading Dr. Sam Wells' book, that somehow culture seems to influence the church. Some theologians go as far as saying, in essence, we do not have a pure Christian religion without the influence of culture and a community, which means even our faith practice is actually somehow influenced by the local culture. And this is seen, for an example, when you are a church member and you go to different churches and different parishes. We worship the same God, but the practices are different, even within the same Anglican church. How much has culture influenced, if at all, our practices and norms as the church?
Yeah, I believe the norms of the church and the culture influence each other. Being in Grahamstown, when I go and worship in other places, when they sing choruses, I don't sing. I listen because there's always new song that is out that I know nothing of. In the college you have set hymns and things, so you sing what has been sung for the last 100 years. But the creativity in the hymns that come out, when you listen to prayers, how the style, the rhyme, it is influenced by where we are and where we have been. So the faithful have found a way of merging all this. I grew up in Mabetla Township, and I think in my street we had, 3 or 4 bottle stores, Shibins, or another street they had others. So it was all those kind of things that when I went to Bashu, the spirits have done their things. They start singing hymns with a little bit of remix in that. And it becomes a worship moment. There will be a priest amongst them who will stand up and quote, correctly or incorrectly, a passage of scripture. So we have found that. Listen to some of the pop music or anything else, how they've taken what we thought was a church hymn or song, and that they have made it very popular. We dance to Jerusalem, and I think we shouldn't be dancing only to Jerusalem. We should listen to the lyrics of Jerusalem. That's a worship. That's a worship song. It is. We have popularized the dance, but we need to popularize again the message in that. So my thing is that I don't see them as one influencing the other. I see them finding a way of influencing each other.
Yeah. Thank you. I was also fascinated listening to you when you spoke and quoting Dr. Sam Wells. In one of the comments, he says, the church is a parable. And I think that hit me quite powerfully, which is we are the image, the story, which means, in other words, how do we use our church culture to actually continue to communicate God's messages in a special way? Because we are, as the church, the parable of God or the parable of Christ. How do we become that image? How do we become that mirror within the context of culture? Using our culture not to actually grow the church and grow people rather than killing their spirits. How do we become that true parable?
I think if we want to do that, we have to be okay with losing control. The problem is, especially those with clerical shirts and collars, there's no way in our church where we're told we have control, but it is number one on our list. And I think when we, with order, allow people to be met where they are,
okay,
we will be able to hear what God is doing in our lives. My supervisor at University of Pretoria talked about the living human documents. That you don't need to read what is being scribed on. Listen to what and where people are. Then we get there. And we come from a culture where when you want to ask something, you don't go directly and ask. You say, let me tell you something. When someone says, let me tell you something, listen to the beginning, because the end will tell you what is it that they want. Yeah. And it will be assumed in the storytelling that you understand what is it that they need. I don't know what has happened that we have taken out people's stories from worship. And if worship time is that restrictive, then it challenges us not to have a Sunday church. It challenges to see church not as a building, but find new ways and new forms of telling people what God is doing in our lives. And when we start hearing that, we realize life is not that bad. This God is still alive because of what I've heard. Yeah. Yeah. And you know this song that we used to sing in our revivals and things, that when I remember what the Lord has done for me, I will never go back anymore. But you tell the story so that you remember not to return back. Yeah. So this is part of the culture, the oral part of it, telling our stories. You spoke about enculturation, which is seen as a process of engagement between the gospel and our culture. You know, how do we help ourselves as a church and as a communities to actually embrace the parallels that are evident between our traditional cultural practices and our spiritual practices? One example in point that I can give, in the Christian tradition, we have what we call baptism, which is a rite of initiation. In the African cultural context, we have imbeleko, which is equally a rite of initiation, which is the same thing that is done in the Christian faith. And there's many other examples. But how do we as a church, begin to actually embrace the parallels and not see one as more than the other or important or not, but walk with both of them and let them reveal God's nature in our lives? How do we help ourselves as churches? Yeah, I think for me, what I will do is to separate a few things from what you said. That there's a Western culture which says initiation into the fold is baptism. Because the Christian culture, the one that we follows, was dipped in the river. In that, and then we have are customs that speaks to whatever clan, tribe that you are part of, that will tell you that this is what we do. And I think for me is when we look at when did we stop bringing this into the church, it's when we were told that it is evil, it is demonic, it should not have a space and time here. And this goes to how we teach, how we interpret our sacred text. It is very important in that. And my lament is that we have a lot of time for preaching and little on teaching, because the more we teach, the more people engage, and then we're able to unpack, understand, oh, so this is why they said this because of the context. This is what they understood, and this is what our context is. And I think this will help the issue that I spoke of earlier of dual membership. Because then, you can do these other things at AICs, but when you want what people call pomp, circumstance, incense, and bells, then you go to St. So-and-so. They will give you that, but you have to have a membership for you to get that. It won't be given to you because you're a child of God in that. And I think for me, when we start taking out the myths, starting to allay what our forebears understood, their relationship with the earth, the elements, and their creator, then we are on a good streak.
Thank you. I will a little bit later move you towards the second part of what we're talking about, which is the use of art and culture as a sacrament. Yeah. But let me take a question from the chat as well that has been asked by one of the participants, and it says, where does one draw the line between church rules and the opportunity to develop liturgy influenced by culture? In particular, how do young people engage rather than be subject to how things are now?
Yeah. I know when it comes to the children, I can speak for those who are ordained, because as part of the vows and things that you will lose the liturgy that has been set aside for that. But I know again that if I need to create something, I need to let the bishop that I serve with to say, this is what happened. So I don't think there are rules per se. It is the guidelines that we need to talk about. That one does not want to lose the Anglican ethos in our liturgy. There's a rhythm. And I think there are 5 or so points that you can use, and Bill says, what is the introduction going to look like? What is the greeting going to look like? What is the penitence going to look like? What is the ministry of the word going to look like? What are the prayers going to look like? And if you're going to have a Thanksgiving, what it look like? I've talked of the headings that you find in our liturgy, especially Eucharist. How you play around with that, it is a matter of creativity. And that's why the Anglican Church of Southern Africa has a liturgical committee. And, just recently been part of when we're introducing new young persons into that. And we need to introduce lay persons into that, because our experiences of where we find ourselves differ. What a church in South Africa, Eastern Cape experience is different from a church in Swaziland experiences and a church in Angola experiences under the umbrella of Anglican Church of Southern Africa. So I think for me, it is one, here's the structure, here's the skeleton. Let's build the skeleton. The problem has arisen in many places. You as a parish priest, you will know that when the notion comes, we don't want this liturgy, we want to do our own thing. That calls for conflict. And I don't think this is where we get to. I'm encouraging, COVID for me is that moment of us unleashing our creativity. The prayers that we have on the prayer book are not adequate to address what we're going through now. We need to write new prayers. We need to be creative. The hymns that we have might have addressed this in the 1920s with the Spanish flu. this is something else. When I sing in COVID times, what do I sing? What do I say to God? So that's for me the space is there. Let's utilize it.
Yeah. So in other words, we should not let what we have actually imprison us in terms of being creative in the aspects. I remember Bishop Duncan, when we were in the youth, he asked us to produce a youth liturgy. And we just took what was in the prayer book and put it in a typed machine. And Bishop Duncan said to us, you're wasting time. You're giving me the same thing. You should have been creative and give me a different service. And I like that about young people. So what I hear you saying, don't wait to be requested. When you have that gift in the space where you are, be creative and write prayers, liturgies, and music of our time. And this one then leads me directly to talk about the use of arts as a sacrament. In fact, for me, it was a very new phenomenon. Arts as a sacrament, which means it's gifts from God that God has given us. How do we nurture this understanding of the arts that are available within our spaces as a sacrament, particularly in our churches and faith communities?
Yeah, my thing is, how do we utilize the artists and the crafts people that are in our communities in that? One that I pride myself of, I don't know if I've told you this, that the Mama Swabi statue in the cathedral.
Yes.
It was done by Ramogolo, my uncle,
Really?
Yes. And I think for me, it was his own expression of understanding Mary in that context. You know, and now it has found a place of honor in one of the most beautiful, cathedrals that I have had the privilege of being part of in that. You know, what I know when we were in the youth groups, when we say we're going to do drama, young people just, I don't know how they got the storyline. I don't know how they got characters. I don't know how they did the directing, but it is done. And now we're coming to the Triduum, which is drama. The Triduum services are drama. So instead of you preaching 7 words, unleash the artists to the people to tell the story or retell the story.
Yeah. So in other words, what I hear you saying, the use of arts and the understanding of arts and culture holistically within our faith communities can actually grow our churches in ways that we could never have imagined. We need to just come out of the box. And I think that's what the young people have been saying to us. And how do we encourage our young people to say, being church is not just about reading a lesson on a Sunday, ushering people and listening to the movie of the priest singing, but your gift, you could use it to the glory of God within the church, whether it's music, whether it's dance, whether it's the drawing arts that people do, and we even have what we call the stations of the cross. Perhaps we need to get them drawn by young people now. How do we encourage that culture within our churches to use? And I love this concept, culture as a sacrament.
Yeah. And I think it's an offering in that. I know part of the responsibility of archdeacons is to look after the fabric of the church. And maybe we need to redefine the fabric of the church now. I remember making that vow. I was like, what are they talking about here? And making more research to understand what it is. But my thing is, how can what I see around the church building and walls reflect me? Mm-hmm. That and the young people sit and they look at the Stations of the Cross and they're like, I don't know these people. I see them when I go somewhere else, but in my localities, this is not reflected. We can do that. And I know young people will keep on saying, we want to participate. And I'm saying, but you are participating. When you find an opportunity to bring something, and one is you need to understand the church that you're part of. And I think that's the grounding. Whether we do this as part of Confirmation Church, we understand who and what the Anglican Church is. So that when you want to do something new, you understand the structure.
Yeah.
That you don't fight the structure. You can't fight this. It has been here and you're going to live it. We fought the structure. We are now assimilating in this structure, because we have found ways of working with the structure in that. And so my thing is, young people, like all of us, if we understand the stages of growth, there comes a time where a monologue on Sunday is not good enough for them. Non-visual stimulation, interaction doesn't speak to them.
Yeah.
Low, slow tempo music, no matter how good the words and the lyrics are, don't speak to them. So, and it's not because they're just funny, it's just because they're growing up. They're understanding things according to where they find themselves in their body and the growth. And we need to understand that. And my thing is, young people are valuable. And for me, they have never been a church of tomorrow. They are the church. And they need to see themselves as the church and not wait for us to vacate the space for them to come in. We need to impart the knowledge that we have received and start to dream new dreams with them.
Yeah. You also spoke, and I think Dr. Sam Wells touches on this point, how we can encourage the use of our buildings for culture and arts, not only of the members of the church, but of the communities we find ourselves. Suffice to say, I think the financial challenges we face today as a church are self-inflicted. Had we moved to the space of creatively, embracing culture, but using our buildings as a means or a space of promoting the cultural arts on the culture, how do we then begin as churches to move from that mind and open our spaces for the communities that we live in, so that it's not about only the members who appear in the parish role?
Yeah, and I think this is where you need a leader that is not afraid to embark on a change.
Yeah.
Because this needs a leader. The parishioners will follow a leader who's confident that even if we want to fail, it's going to be a spectacular fail because something new will have come out of that. But we're not going to fail, we're going to succeed. Yeah. And I think of, I think it was Christ the King, Sophia Town, when they did Sunday Jazz Vespers. Wow! The fact that I love jazz and I love church and I love worship, that was a beautiful kind of combination. And I know that the cathedral in Cape Town did something to use the space for arts and things. And, now we have to think, with the restrictions, we can still do that. But Dean, this has to go into how we configure our church. Our church space for me now, which, I'm glad I'm not in a parish because they will have issues with that even the way we sit, looking at each other's back when we talk about fellowship, it's not doing it for me. Fellowship doesn't make me to look at you. I need to see you. Sawubona. That kind of a thing so it means that the next churches that we're going to build, or churches when we have to think of what other space can this be used for? We have young artists who wants to exhibit their talents. They can't hire these places that want them millions of rands or thousands that they cannot do to curate. But the church is there, locked, with a beautiful space and parking, and ablution services and security. So if you say, we'll give you this for 3 hours to curate, we'll advertise, and we'll do that. Imagine when that famous young artist tells the world who gave them their first break.
Yes, yes.
It will be the church. So we keep continuously, we pray for you to be successful when we have all the resources that can make this person a success.
Yes. Which is the story of Humasikir.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah. That first trumpet
came from a priest, Archbishop
Yes.
Trevor Huddleston, and look at what it did to the world. So what I'm hearing you, we have an opportunity here as a church to use arts and culture as a form of evangelism and furthering
Yes.
of the gospel of God than only the sermons. Maybe the sermons don't speak to other people, but that art will speak to other people. Dr. Vicentia, I want to ask you now to just make to us to conclude your final comments. But just before you do that, let me just raise these questions as you think about your final comments. Londiwe Musito is asking this question. Our canons should be reviewed with the participation of youth in order to allow youth to be creative in culture, arts within the churches. It seems that our youth, the way we are structured, the way we are regulated, is a stumbling block to the creativity we are talking about.
And it's not. One, we have to elect young people to parish councils. That's the first stage. We're not even talking canons there. We have to elect our young people to diocesan synods that deals with these motions and pass them to provincial. You know, provincial doesn't concoct its own resolutions. They are fed from diocesan synods in that. So we need to have our young people as part of the leadership and administration of our church in that. And the secret is I'm going back to school. And this time is to study canon law, because you can't continue to complain when there are opportunities that you need to grab. So my thing is that young people, avail yourselves. The church says a member of our church is baptized, confirmed, and over the age of 18 or 18 over. Most of our church members are there. So avail yourselves for council, avail yourselves for diocesan synods, and when you're diocesan synods, avail yourselves for provincial. That's how we will get there and change these canons.
Catherine in the chat feels that we seem to be emphasizing the youth, and adults equally have those gifts. So she says, how do we integrate the rich maturity and wisdom of all ages, so that as much as we emphasize the youth, let's not forget those who are also in the elderly age, but who are equally gifted? How to then also encourage those among us who are of a matured age?
Yeah, well, I didn't need to discriminate. I now see myself as a mature age. And when not so long ago, I spoke as a young person. And my thing is, one thing that has come up is the tension between what the mature persons in our church are doing, conflicting with the young people. That has to end. But the talents, the gifts are given to all of us indiscriminately.
Yeah.
And all of us have to use it. It doesn't speak to your gender, your sexual orientation, your race, your class. It speaks to what you have been gifted with by God. And that needs to be used for the glory of the one who is giving it to you.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to invite you now to just share your final words, your encouraging words, and if you can also, encourage us as well, drawing from the book by Dr. Sam, A Future That's Bigger Than the Past. That's the book that we've been reflecting on or drawing from as we have this conversation. And I'll encourage all of us to try and get the book. You know, there's more in it than what we're sharing. Any last words, any concluding comments, Dr. Kgabe?
I am part of a church that is going through a strife because of COVID, that we feel that maybe we don't know what the future looks like. If we take time and step back, we can see what the future looks like. It asks us to do something different. It asks us to use what we have been given. Our lamenting will have to have a stop. And visioning and creativity has to take place. You know, we are given according to the measure we use. If you do not use, go to the Bible, there's a story about the talents. You get to know what happens about that. And so my thing is, as difficult as the times are, we should not be despondent because we have the answers. We have been gifted in so many ways. And using Sam Wells' words that a church is a meeting place of human and divine. So come as you are, and God will meet you where you are. Of gospel and culture. You know, you look at the gospel stories, they're embedded in a culture. We have our culture, but still Jesus Christ continues to be spoken of in the ministry beyond the years and the decades and the centuries. You know, it's a place of timeless truth. You go there, you'll be told of that mamang, this family, and all those kind of things. We carry on what has been graciously handed to us in that. We embody the experiences, you know, the lived experiences. That's why I don't want people to go to church and become something that they're not when they immediately leave.
Yeah.
Be who you are outside when you are. It's a lived experience because God knows you better than I know you. And again, it's a meeting place for the word and the world.
Yes. Yeah.
And so those are my closing, that we cannot make the church what is not.
Dr. Vicentia, let me take this opportunity to thank you for joining us today and sharing with us and leading us. And of course, we look forward to continued partnership with the HeartEdge family, particularly at the College of Transfiguration. Oh, by the way, that's where I also studied, so that I'm a product of that college. And we look forward to this partnership. To all of you, our participants who are joining us via YouTube, thank you, and we give thanks to God for your participation. We can change the church and the shape of the church. We need to just see arts and culture as the means of evangelism, as a means of discipleship for the gospel of God. Remember the book by Dr. Sam Wells, A Future That's Bigger Than the Past. Have a blessed Mothering Sunday. May God bless you. Thank you for joining us. Goodbye.